In this video, we're going to talk about the concept of consumer surplus, and we're going to apply it to individual consumers to answer the question, how much better off does a particular trade make a consumer? Okay, how much extra benefit do they get from making this purchase relative to how well off they would have been without making the purchase? Now, if you remember from chapter 2, we talked about the fact that when you have two parties that are trading goods with each other, any given trade is going to make both parties better off, right? As long as they both know what they're giving up and what they are receiving, the fact that they are willing to trade the goods with each other strongly suggests that each person values what they are getting more than what they are giving up in the trade. Now, that means that there are gains from trade. That is the term that economists use to describe the amount by which the traders are made better off. They are capturing gains from trade. In chapter 2, we focused on people trading one good for another. So for example, Alice and Bob were trading fish for blankets. But in a developed economy, people aren't typically trading one good for another. That's called barter. That type of exchange is called barter. In a developed economy like the United States or East Asia, Europe, pretty much anywhere in the world where people aren't living in a tribal society, that type of exchange of one good for another doesn't exist very often, except maybe among small children trading sports cards or toys with each other. In an industrialized economy, trade usually involves money, where one person is handing over cash and the other person is handing over a good. But that is still a trade. That is a trade of money for a good. Or if you're the seller, you're trading the good in exchange for money. When trade involves money, then we call the person who gave up the money the buyer, or another word for the buyer is the consumer. Okay? And economists call the consumer's share of the gains from trade, we call that their consumer surplus. It's how much of the gains from trade get captured by the buyer. In other words, when a buyer and seller make a trade with each other, we would say that the world has been made better off by a certain amount. And consumer surplus is how much of that better off went to the buyer of the good. So to measure the consumer surplus, we have to think of another concept, which is this idea of a willingness to pay. When an economist talks about a maximum willingness to pay, they're basically thinking about what is the highest price that you could charge a consumer that they would still be willing to make a purchase. Okay, so for example, if we were selling a can of Coca-Cola like in the previous video, that example, you could imagine having a consumer in front of you and putting the can of Coke in front of them and saying, would you pay me a price of 5 cents for this can of cola? The answer is probably going to be yes. And then you could raise the price to 6 cents and then 7 cents and so on. And at each price, you're figuring out whether or not the consumer would be willing to purchase that can. Eventually, you're going to hit a price where if you raise the price by a penny more, the consumer would no longer be willing to make the purchase. Okay, so maybe you get up to $1.68 and they are willing to make that purchase. But when you raise the price to $1.69, they say, no, thank you. If the price is that high, I would rather just keep the cash and go use it to buy something else. Okay, in that case, that $1.68 would be their maximum willingness to pay, which we shorten to WTP sometimes for shorthand when we're writing it down. So that maximum willingness to pay, that is the most that a consumer would spend on a particular item. Now, if you're thinking about an individual consumer, their consumer surplus on a given purchase is going to be the difference between the most they would have been willing to pay, their WTP, and the price that consumer actually does pay. So the formula for an individual's consumer surplus, CS, that would be willingness to pay, or WTP, minus the price, or P. All right, so let's go through a quick example of this to illustrate the point. Suppose that you are a consumer and there is a watch that you would like to buy. Now, your maximum willingness to pay for this watch, the highest price that you would be willing to pay is $150. But let's suppose that that is not the price that the seller is actually charging. Let's say that when you walk into the store, the price that you see on the sticker for that watch is $75 instead of $150. Okay? Now, my claim to you is that if you make that purchase, you as a consumer are becoming wealthier. You're getting richer by a value of the difference between willingness to pay and price, or $75. Okay? Now let's think about how this would work. Because if you think about it from a seller's point of view, if we took the price he was selling and we subtracted out what it cost him to produce that good, it's obvious that that difference is profit. And it's obvious that the producer is made better off by that amount. But very similar logic can be used to think about consumer surplus, the amount by which the buyer is made better off. So why would this purchase make someone better off by $75? Well, let's think about the assets that this person, you in this case, that you have before you make the trade, and then the assets that you would have after you make the trade. Let's say that you walk into the store with a certain amount of cash, and that cash is $200 in your pocket. Now remember, the most that you would be willing to spend of that $200 on the watch would be $150. But at the outset, this is what you have, $200 in cash. Now, after you make the trade, you make a purchase, right? And you still have some cash left over. The amount of cash you have left over is the difference between the cash you walked in with and the price that you had to pay for the watch. That's $200 minus $75. So you still have $175 left in your pocket. Okay. Now, usually when we look at a transaction like this, it's very common for people to say, well, I had $200 when I walked in. I had $175 when excuse me, that's not $175. It's $125. 200 minus 75 is $125. I had $200 in cash when I walked into the store. I had $125 in cash when I walked out. So I must be $75 worse off than before I made the trade. But that is ignoring the fact that you walked out not just with your cash, but also with the watch. The watch is now an asset that belongs to you as a consumer. And remember that the value of that watch to you is $150. The value to you is not the price that you paid, it's the highest price that you would have been willing to pay. So you have a watch that is worth $150 to you, plus the cash that's $125. And so your total assets after making the purchase is $125 plus $150, which is $275. Notice that now your total assets are $75 more than they were before you made the trade. And notice also that the difference between how well off you are now and how well off you were before is $75. Well, what would we say your consumer surplus was? It's your willingness to pay, $150, minus the price that you paid, $75, which is equal to $75. Your consumer surplus was $75, therefore you are better off after the trade by an amount equal to $75. Okay? Now, this is an important concept in economics, the idea that the consumer benefits when he makes a trade. The consumer is wealthier, in a sense, after consumption, after buying a product, than he was before he bought the product. And the reason the consumer is better off after the trade, is wealthier after the trade, is precisely because he values the item at a price higher than the price he had to pay. Okay? Now, you could have a case where your willingness to pay was exactly $75. The price you paid was exactly $75, so that in that trade you exactly broke even. Okay? In that case, you were not made any better off by the trade, but you wouldn't be made any worse off either. Okay, so that you would be indifferent between making the trade or not. And in general, we would say in a market, as long as everybody is, is knowledgeable about the product that they're buying, either you're going to be wealthier, you're going to walk out of the store with more in value than you walked in if you make the purchase, or you're at least going to break even. All those consumers will be at least as well off after the trade as they were before the trade. Okay, in the next video, we're going to take this idea of consumer surplus and we're going to apply it to the market level and not think about just an individual consumer, but think about all the consumers that make a purchase in the market.